What's your emergency?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the PIO Podcast, a place to discuss all public information-related topics for police, fire, EMS, and local and federal government organizations.
It was a good learning experience for a lot of us that social media is not real life.
But we have to remember the media are very rarely a target audience. They're simply that conduit.
Our words have impacts on individuals, and it may not be positive. So just being thoughtful and mindful of the words that we speak.
I think what's so interesting about this position too, and this job and this profession, is that every one of us is looking for purpose, and when we find it here, that's it.
To know is that a crisis for one is not necessarily a crisis for another.
Wow, here we are in 2024. This is the 4th season of the PIO podcast. Thank you to all our previous guests over the prior 3 seasons. You have truly made the PIO podcast a great success. For this year, I've already lined up some great guests, so sit back and enjoy today's guest. Good afternoon. Today on the PIO podcast, we welcome marketing strategist and owner of the Hartwood Creative, Jenny Weeks. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Jenny, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Looking at, I do a lot of research when I look for guests, and came across you, and you've got a really interesting background. So you have a journalism background, but I see that you have a bachelor's degree in mass communications and a master's degree in public relations, advertising, and applied communications. That's a lot. So that's a lot. I mean, that's an awful lot of educational background. How did you end up getting into emergency management and fire protection? How'd that happen?
It's funny. I often say that I kind of fell into my fire service position. The summer between my freshman and sophomore year of college, I started working at the fire department just as a summer hire in the office. And I was on my way to, going through school. I was going to become a teacher. I had it all planned out, the whole 9 yards. And then I realized, hey, there's this entire division that is dedicated to public education. And, there's that journalism component with PIO. I had no idea that was even a possibility. So I diverted my studies and whatnot and went towards communication. I've always loved writing and journalism. And so I pivoted my degree, and my concentration was in journalism overall for my bachelor's. My master's was actually, I just finished it this year in June. And that was just to kind of build on what I already had. And it was a long time ago that I graduated with my bachelor's. So I thought that, social media wasn't even a thing that was included back then. So let's see how it's morphed. And I'm really glad that I went that direction. But
excellent.
Yeah.
The fire protection services, especially out west, they are when it comes to public information, they are the peak of putting information out, extremely timely, hourly, doing stuff remote. I meant wonder it. And I'll tell you, I don't think anybody ever can understand how much work a fire PIO does when there's an active fire scene. If you want to learn how to be a good PIO, go hang out with the guys and girls that are doing fire PIO stuff during an active fire.
Yeah, we're a fun group. I'll tell you that. But we're moving and shaking the entire time, and it's a lot of fun, but it is a lot of work. I wholeheartedly agree.
So how long did you do that job before you kind of morphed into Hartwood Creative?
So I have been in the fire service now for 22 years, and I am still working full time.
Oh.
So yes, I have had Hartwood Creative. I started it back in 2011. And then I was doing social media management as most of what Hartwood Creative was back then. And that's really morphed, just in the last few years. I've ramped that up and kind of, put my skill sets to work in a different way. So, yes.
So which fire protective service are you still working for?
I'm with West Pierce Fire and Rescue in Washington
West Pierce.
State.
Okay. For some reason, I have no idea how I missed that. I thought you had left the field and opened Hartwood Creative. So that's awesome. Thank you very much for your service.
Yes, absolutely. No, it's doing both right now and loving it.
let's talk about Hartwood Creative then. I see as a public relations firm, you help other agencies do stuff. How is it helping you get to their goals? These agencies get to the goals of their marketing strategies.
Well, it's funny because, like I said, I started back in 2011 and I was really working with private sector. And I was doing social media management, and I don't know why, but I had this mental block that I needed to separate the two. I needed to, I for my business, I was just going to do private industry. And finally it was just kind of like, why? I have the skill set, and, I'm also a law enforcement spouse, and 2020 was just downright difficult for a lot of reasons. And it kind of started me down this path of I was shying away from being on social media personally. I was really frustrated with the national narrative. And I was seeing that, especially police departments, but, a lot of government agencies, they were kind of assigning social media to somebody, whether they had that skill set or not. And when you're dealing with things that are very difficult and those narratives that are really hard to overcome, a lot of the times I was watching them just kind of shy away, and they were not telling their stories. And it was kind of that light bulb moment of, well, I can help them tell their stories a little bit better. And that's through education and helping them to understand how social media works so that they can create content that will resonate with their audience and things like that. So that's where it kind of started to morph into let's talk about government communications and let's add some education and training courses that will help people do their job on a day-to-day basis, because
that's outstanding.
Yeah, telling their story is just so incredibly important to me.
It's interesting that you bring this whole thing up about 2020 and the pandemic and everything, and I know a lot of public agencies, especially law enforcement agencies, they shied away from doing anything out in, no public events, no tours. But then you're right, they did shy away from doing anything social media, and it was just put out the traffic crash information. There's a police incident. Don't come in this area. But they didn't really do a whole lot in 2020, 2021 at all. And it's interesting observation. So what kind of agencies are you working for right now?
So I still hold some of my private sector clients, which are really fun to work with. But I'm working with law enforcement right now. So a lot of my client load is law enforcement, and that's anything from training with agencies specifically, whether it's groups of PIOs or groups of recruiters or things like that, but getting them to understand how their social media can be a benefit to them, because it's easy to shy away and just put it away and say, well, we'll post someday. But, that's not really how social media works. And when we're in this crisis of, and that's not just for law enforcement, but, we're in this crisis for hiring and recruiting and things like that. You got to keep going. And that's what's been really fun for me, is to be able to step in with these agencies, and again, mainly law enforcement, and just say, let's do this. Like, let's buckle down, let's do the work, and get them excited about it.
Yeah. The recruiting process has really been one of the most difficult things for law enforcement to grasp. I mean, we used to go to job fairs, and we would occasionally post something about we're having a hiring, and that was it. And I remember when I first got in this field 30 years ago, I showed up to a police test. There were 1,500 people there for no jobs, to create a list and hopefully find a job. Now, you could put a list, you could put a thing out, hold a hiring event, and have 50 show up.
Exactly. And yeah, it's funny you say that, but you show up and there's 1,500 people. I remember showing up one time, working for the fire department, and I had been on vacation, and I walked into the station Monday morning, and there's people literally sleeping in tents on our front apron, waiting for the doors to open to come in and grab their application for a list. It was the same thing. It was a list. We weren't even hiring. And I was like, what did I miss? And I'm like, oh, I've been gone. Yeah, we're establishing a list, and people want to be the first ones. And, that's obviously before they were available online. But yeah, it was cutthroat back then. And it's just really, really hard right now for a lot of agencies. Just, hey, let's get some good folks in these processes.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. So in recruitment, and I'm going to go off on a tangent from the questions here. In recruitment, agencies right now, they're kind of they post to Facebook and then they pay for the boost to put it out there to certain areas, and that's kind of it. I don't see a whole lot. The bigger ones that do have a budget, yeah, they're flying people out to like Chicago, or like here, Dallas PD. They'll fly people out to Chicago and LA and New York, and they'll offer hiring bonuses and all that. And they actually have a recruitment process. But a smaller agency, maybe 150 people, they don't really have a strategy to recruit. They just put a flyer out and that's it. And how, as a PIO, can we improve upon our ability to reach out to the community, whether it's locally or regionally, to come out and maybe get a job with us?
Let's take a quick break.
I think it would be useful at least to experiment, and I know some universities have started to experiment with this, but experiment with having, a required course maybe for all students entering the university. They used to have a course at my university, which was like here's how to go to college class, here's how to study and things like that. They don't have that course anymore, but instead of having something like that, have a course that show students, here's the history of free speech, here's how it.
I think recruiting has so many levels to it at certain times, but, you think about sending out a flyer of, hey, we're hiring, or, hey, we're going to be at this career fair. You might reach a few people. Okay. You might boost a post and get a few more. That's great. We want people to be interested, but for me with recruiting, it truly comes down to connection. And it comes down to, can you connect with your audience, and can you truly help them to understand what you do day to day? Because if they are someone who has never called 911 a day in their life, they are only going off of maybe what they've seen on TV, or they have no idea that outside of 911 calls, all the great things that we're doing in public safety, and that's all the way across the board. But it's helping them to understand, what does this job actually look like? Because I think that focusing on folks that want to be in the industry, that's great, but they know where to go and look for the information. They know where, what testing agencies to go for, or what websites to look at and things like that. But to be able to truly tell your story and relate to people and build those relationships with folks that maybe have never thought about being in the industry, those are the ones that they can make some great police officers or firefighters or public servants. And I think that recruiting in general, there's ways to tell that story. And I feel as PIOs, we are kind of recruiters as well, even if we're not technically assigned as a recruiter. And we have the ability to tell that story.
Right. I mean, just the day-to-day connection stuff of what we do. Like, an officer that I remember several years ago, one of the officers that used to work for me, he went to a house because it was a welfare check, because nobody had seen the little old lady lived in the house. It was like 100 degrees for like a week. Goes to the house. He finds her in the house. She's okay, but kind of disorientated. So the officer on the radio says, I'm going to sit with her. I'm getting her something cold to drink. I'm going to make her a sandwich. And I'm like, heard that. I'm like, oh, I got to get that audio and that officer talking about it. The fact that he got her something cold to drink, made her a sandwich, and then she was okay. Those are little things that connect us to our community and build that. And I always call it the bank. We build our trust bank up in a community, so that as we keep making deposits into the trust bank, those negative things that may happen, they don't pull as much out of the trust bank as the good things that go in.
Absolutely. And unless that one single resident is going to take the time to tell that story, who else is going to tell that story? Those are stories that need to be told. And I love the trust bank analogy. I think that's great. Because that's it, is you've got to be telling those stories, because people need to hear them. They need to be able to hear that and know that those are the things that you guys do every single day. But who hears about it and how often?
Right. and that's part of that content strategy, and what, kind of planning that stuff out, and also connecting with your staff to find out about those stories. Because I was lucky to hear it on the radio, but if I wouldn't have been there, or I would have been in a meeting not listening, I would have never known.
Yes, absolutely. Training, that's one thing, is training internally for your agency of, hey, what does the PIO want or need to know. It's not only just incident response and, the horrific, car crashes and the things that are going to block the road. Those are things we want to know, of course. But there is so much more that it's shifting that mentality of what kind of stories can we be telling and how does that work? And training our folks to understand that and what our needs are is really important as well.
Yeah. Jenny, I came across, when I was doing a research for you, I came across a post in which you had just completed some content planning workshops. So let's talk about how important content is in public relations.
Oh my gosh. I could go on for hours on this. I promise I won't, but I just think it's one of those things that I had to learn it the hard way. As someone who's been managing social media platforms since 2009, there's been a lot of evolution. And I preach for content planning because it helps you just to be more well-rounded in your messaging, and it stops you from being just simply reactive on how you post. It's really hard where it's like, oh, I haven't posted in a day or two. What am I going to post today? What's happening in real time, where you could be having things that do happen in real time, but you're going to save that and plan it out and be more thoughtful with your post and turn it into education and all those different things. But social media, it's about consistency. And that's where a lot of us tend to struggle, especially if you don't work 9 to 5, or this isn't your only job duty. That's what I was finding with Hartwood Creative and building that out is so many people, they might be a patrol officer that works graveyard. Well, they're still going to have to figure out what kind of content's going to go out, but that's not as easy to do. And the content planning workshop, oh my gosh, we have so much fun in that workshop. And it's designed for PIOs and social media managers to basically look and see what content they already have and how do you turn that into social media posts? Because I think that we overlook that. We overlook not necessarily that it's just so simplistic, but the fact that we have a lot of content already created. We just have to figure out how to deliver it appropriately, especially when it comes to social media. So in that course, we dive into using analytics. We use our audience for how to come up with ideas. And that's another thing I think that we overlook. It's easy to say like, hey, look what we did today, and post a photo, but, are we asking ourselves, like, is that something our audience really wants to see? And how do we talk about that? How do we get them engaged and all of that? And it's so much more than making a content calendar. It's about telling that story and building relationships.
I used to do a thing in one of my old agencies. I used to do a thing, Ask a PIO. So I would post a thing up saying, you have an hour, anything you post, as long as it's related to our organization, I'll answer it as best I can. And if I can't, I'll get you the answer, in a couple hours or whatever. And the engagement was truly interesting. I would get some great questions, and then that would help give me some content to plan for later on. I was a big person on a content calendar. So I came up with like a year calendar, and every month, there's all kinds of prevention message months, things that are out there. So those are the common ones, but they kind of just helps guide you through the day. Like October's, it's crime prevention month. So I did the 31 days of crime prevention. Every day we talked about a different crime prevention activity, or what you could do to prevent crime in your community. So those are the kinds of things. I think if having a target like that to help you, give you direction, definitely helps.
Absolutely. And I love that, like, the crime prevention, because that builds trust in your audience, knowing that, hey, you're here to give them this information and to keep them safe, because the goal is to turn our audience into our supporters, just like you talked about the trust bank. But ultimately, we want them to be ambassadors for us. We want them to go to bat for us when there's times where we just don't feel like we can go to bat for ourselves, as much as we can. And I think it's important.
I agree. I saw that you are a FEMA Basic PIO course instructor. That's amazing. Yes. That's outstanding. What do you find challenging about teaching that course?
It's funny. I recommend that course to anyone and everyone, even if you're thinking about diving into PIO, because I feel like it helps you decide if that's the right fit for you. But the biggest challenge for me is to not be able to create the slides myself. And understandably so. I get it. We're going off a curriculum. I love it. But I have so many notes just chicken scratched right into my instructor manual that I'd love to be able to modify some slides so that I don't forget to tell the audience something that they could take from it or how to connect with it.
Right. Sometimes that is a problem. You're teaching the curriculum that FEMA put out. So, and nothing against what they do, because the curriculum's great stuff. It's just, sometimes it's because it's got to be vetted so many times, it gets stagnant after a while. And that's, so on the other side, what do you find the most rewarding about teaching that course?
I love being able to connect one-on-one with the students. And, we love hearing the feedback at the end of the course. Like, we've spent 3 days with them and they, just talk about how much the instructors help them to better understand the concept. Because it's one thing, and it's something that I thrive on as an instructor. I let me show you what that means rather than just tell you. Because I can read off a PowerPoint all day long. That's fine. But if you can't, relate the concepts together or how to apply it in real life, I don't want them to walk away going, well, I took that course, but now what do I do? And I think that there's so many nuances to PIO and government communications that you don't really learn until you're in the thick of it. And so I love being able to share, lessons learned, whether they're good or bad, because I have some bad ones too, where I was like, please don't ever do this. Let me help you. Because we want those
learn
students
from our mistakes, right?
Yes, absolutely. Because we want those students to hit the ground running. That's always our goal.
So I came across a picture and I sent it to you of you doing an interview about a train derailment, and I believe that was like your first big interview, if I'm not mistaken.
It was.
Again, I'm looking at this going, holy cow, you got a lot of people around you. We do interviews all the time in a lot of cases, but obviously this picture is not just your average one-on-one interview, not even 3-on-1. There's, 20 people there minimum. So I want to talk about your thoughts and the things that you remember about that. And so what are your thoughts as you're having the microphones thrust up in front of you?
I'm not going to lie. I was insanely intimidated at that point. It was one of my first large scale incidents, and I was in my mid-20s at the time. So I felt like all these reporters had so much experience, and I'm walking in, they're just going to be there. I thought they were going to eat me alive. And luckily they did not. So, but I will say I learned a lot from that experience, because interviews are tough, whether they're one-on-one or they are in, you're doing kind of a press conference type of scenario there. They're difficult, and you don't always do them all the time. At least for me, we do them often, but not like that. And I will say this group specifically, they were fantastic. The scene that we were on, I think that happened about 4 a.m. in the morning, but we had such a hard time with the location of it that they couldn't access it. Media couldn't get there on their own. So I had the opportunity at that point to brief them all in a media staging area prior to, and say, hey, we had to wait for daylight, number one. So as you can see, it is daylight in that photo. They were with me for hours at that point. So it gave me an opportunity to actually build kind of a relationship and a rapport with them before they, threw all those cameras and microphones in my face. And, I was able to ask questions of, hey, if you give me some of your questions ahead of time, let me make sure that I can answer as many as I can. Cause, that helps everybody. It helps them so that they have a solid interview, and it makes the agencies involved. It makes them look good. Like, hey, this is what we're doing. We want to educate our public. And so it went well, but it was a little rocky at first, going, what in the world am I going to do with all these microphones? And yeah, the photo is from me in the back, so I don't know what my eyes looked like from the front.
That would have been an interesting picture. Saucers. Yeah, that would have been an interesting initial picture. When do you know when it's time to break and end the interview?
Sometimes that can be tough to gauge. But I think it's all dependent on the reporters that you're working with. When I brief groups like this, I lay my ground rules before the cameras even turn on, and that can differ depending on the situation. But it might be, hey, everybody is going to have one question. If you want to work together so that you make sure everybody gets as many questions answered as you can, that's great. Sometimes it's deciding which order they'll go in so that they're not talking over each other, things like that. But I've rarely had media that doesn't play well with others, or, if the questions start going off topic, I'll shut it down. But I will say, even then, it doesn't happen all that often, thankfully, at least for me. But I think that setting those ground rules ahead of time, I think it helps both of us just to understand, like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is where we're going. We're going to get you what you need, and then we're going to all get out of here.
What is there a reasonable amount of time to conduct an interview in a length? because you could talk for hours if you needed to, and nobody wants to be up there for that long.
No, I certainly don't. It's so true. I would say, I think it's all dependent on the information that you have available at the time. Because before social media was how we were dealing with the media, or at least getting that information or holding statement out very quickly. It might be, we're getting there, 10, 15 minutes. Hey, let me check, let me get in and chat with my IC and figure out, what I have for you. But let's get going really quickly. But I think anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, because we all know also the interview, they're only going to use 30 seconds to a minute of it. If that, that's being very generous. Absolutely. But I think social media has also changed that landscape drastically. I will say for our fire district where we are, we're about 45 minutes south of Seattle. And so that's where most of our media stations are coming from. And I've had them tell me, if nobody's dead, we're not going to fight traffic to get down there. So it's on us a lot to be able to tell the story ourselves. And so on-camera interviews aren't as often for us, just because of our geographical location. But we are very, very good at telling the story, at least with starting with social media and then following up and with media interview calls and things like that.
Awesome. Social media has really changed dramatically in the last several years, especially with the change from Twitter to X and some other things. Public sector agencies are really having a difficulty distributing information to their followers. They lose, the posts disappear. They're not getting that algorithm. They're not getting that engagement off the algorithm. And with Twitter, unless you're paying for X, for Twitter Blue, your engagement has really dropped off. So how can agencies change their approach to their posts and market them appropriately so they get a better reach?
I always suggest diversifying your posts. And some of it, social media is a beast. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say or sugarcoat it and just say, oh yeah, it's really simple to use. There's a lot of nuances and every platform has different features. And I think that using a variety of those features is essential. So understanding what platforms you're already using and what's available to you, because they consume information differently. So you have to know your audience so that you can tailor that information to them. I'll use the example, if we've got an incident response, yes, you're probably going to jump on Twitter and X, to first even try and reach the media, because obviously their reach is massive, especially, compared to some of the smaller agencies. But however, think about duplicating your tweets on Instagram and Facebook stories, because there's some folks that are never going to be on one platform versus another. Once the incident is over, maybe you decide, or at least you have enough information to paint a full picture. Maybe you decide to create a feed post on Instagram and Facebook so that it lives there, so that you can, have it there. Because when people are interested in a topic, they will go looking for it. The other thing I always suggest, especially in social media, is focusing on your call to action in a caption. So, whether that's, hey, please share this message with your neighbors, or, hey, we want to reach as many people in our community as possible. Could you please share this? Those can work really well because people are likely to respond to a very direct ask if it's specific and it's simple to do. And with that, you can then help increase your reach. But overall, I think educating your audience as well as where to find information from you, whether that's, community related or it's incident related or whatnot, because if they don't know where to go, they get frustrated or say, I couldn't find that, or, I don't know anything about it, or, then you're dealing with other issues, especially if you're wanting people to do something specific, say evacuate their home because, you've got wildfire, something like that. But I think diversifying and understanding those features is a massive help.
And going with the whole diversifying, the concept of content marketing is still something that's a little foreign to some of the public sector agencies out there. Could you explain why content marketing and why it's so important for them to consider effective content marketing strategies?
Yes. And strategy is always, that's that hill I'm willing to die on. Because if you don't have a strategy, it's not going to be successful. And I kind of align this to when COVID shut the world down, and everybody relied on messages being available online. So our workload for online content it went through the roof as communicators. And then as the world kind of reopened, all those in-person things also went back up, but the audiences still expected you to have that, all of that information still online. That expectation didn't go away, and the workload continued to stay high. And the biggest thing I say all the time to even our internal folks is like, why do you need a mailed newsletter? You have to pay to print it. You have to pay to mail it. Exactly. Because no one medium will ever reach everyone. There's just no way. And with government communications, a lot of the time, the only thing our target audience even has in common is the geographical location of where they live. We're not brick and mortar businesses and it's like, hey, I sell, candles and I want to target this to women aged 20 to 40 and they live in this area. Like, that's not what we're doing. And so having that strategy of how do we reach people by also diversifying the type of content that we're building is insanely important. And I can't stress enough just how important knowing your audience and knowing who they are and where they are and how they consume their information. Because what that does is allow you to lean into those analytics and insights and say, okay, this went really well. Let's work on, let's try this again and see how it goes so that you can understand what is going to be successful, because there's nothing more frustrating than spending a ton of time on content and then it totally flops. And
right.
it happens, but you don't want to spend that time and energy on that.
Right. And this kind of goes into the next question that I have is, as agencies have really embraced social media and they've really dug into it, are they missing opportunities in other avenues? Like, I know a lot of agencies, they've kind of let their websites go, or they're not putting out a newsletter or an email letter or anything of those nature. They're not trying to capture email addresses. What are agencies missing?
I absolutely think that they're missing something and missing out on creating relationships with those pieces of those target audience. And, it's kind of like putting all your eggs in one basket. So if you're only going to use social media, you're just never going to reach certain parts of your audience. And, I go back to, we had a wildfire this summer, and somebody actually wrote into our social media and said, how do we get this information to people who are not on social? And it was one of those where we're like, we're working so hard to put out information that's changing constantly. And, we're trying to evacuate homes and we've got all of these messages that need to go out, and somebody saying people are not being reached. Therefore, for us, that's a huge red flag of, hey, we're needing to really focus on keeping people safe. So what do? We need to pop onto our website and put a page on our website, and then educate people where to look for it. That was all in the midst of this 3-alarm fire that we're going, oh my gosh, like, okay, one more thing to do. But it was insanely important. And it was one of those, it was eye-opening for us because as PIOs, we're on social media all the time. We're like, right. Yeah, we'll just throw it on social.
Isn't everybody's there, right?
Everybody's there, right?
Except,
and we're going to reach them all.
You think about those 60 to 80-year-olds that are not on social media, or, the people that are freaked out about social media to begin with, because they think they're being spied on by the government and all those other things that go with it.
Yes.
All right. So let's talk about email marketing and why that is kind of an important factor for an agency to consider to engage your community members.
Oh, I can't even tell you enough how much I love email marketing. I really do. And I think it's a very underutilized tool that a lot of agencies are actually missing out on. And it goes back to reaching that individual audience because, they're there and they're wanting information from you. They just have to know where to find it. And some people, that's how they're going to get their information, is when it is hand delivered to their inbox. And I think that, certain demographics, they're like, oh, well, I don't use email, therefore it's not worthwhile. Where again, we have to think about it's kind of the same thing. Well, you have audiences that don't use social media. It's that same thing. It's that all, eggs in one basket. And I think that this plays to diversifying it for sure. And it's funny because I do get the question a lot of, well, okay, but what do I email my audience about? I don't have anything to say. And I always say, I recommend starting extremely small, build your email list, and you can promote that on social media in different avenues and things like that of trying to get people on there. And
Jenny, that's scary that somebody would say, I don't know what to say. It's like you have like months and months of content. All you have to do is put that into a newsletter, and God, Constant Contact has a whole template. What's the one, the monkey, emails?
MailChimp. Yep.
MailChimp has the one. Yep. I mean, you could do that and dump email addresses into it and send it out to thousands of people, and it's in a readable format across their phone, their computer, a tablet, whatever it might be, and they've forgotten. A lot of people have forgotten, I think.
Absolutely. And a lot of those too, they have analytics attached to it. So you can see what's successful. You can see the open rate and things like that. Because when you think about goals, SMART goals and things like that, we want something measurable, of course. They're all built that way so that they can help you to determine, hey, how can I best serve my audience? And it's just one more tool in the toolbox.
Absolutely. Jenny, is there a question I should have asked? And if so, how would you have answered it?
I don't think so, but I am looking forward to the rapid fire.
Cool. All right, here we go. Rapid fire questions. Texting or talking?
Texting, because I always need to refer back to what I said.
Chocolate or vanilla?
It depends. Vanilla ice cream, but not cake, and chocolate cake, but not chocolate ice cream.
Okay. Coffee or tea?
Both, but we always start with coffee.
Adult drink of choice?
A lovely glass of red wine.
What would be your superpower if you could have one?
Teleporting. I'm not the most patient person, especially when it comes to sitting in traffic.
God, and where you're at, traffic is a nightmare. My son was stationed up in Everett for a year, and the traffic is a nightmare up there.
It is.
Ask permission or beg for forgiveness?
Oh, in this industry, you have to learn to ask for forgiveness.
Place you most want to travel to?
I actually really want to do an East Coast road trip. Boston has been my favorite city that I've visited on the East Coast, and I'd like to explore more.
That's Fenway Park is my bucket list baseball stadium I want to go to. Yeah. So, yeah. I agree with you. First celebrity crush?
Paul Walker. I was a big Varsity Blues fan in high school.
Guilty pleasure food?
I love French fries, especially anything like with specialty ones, like with fun toppings and things like that.
So you like In-N-Out Burger animal fries?
Oh, yeah.
If you could have coffee with any historical figure living or dead, who would it be?
That's a tough one. I would probably say Abraham Lincoln, because I would simply want to get his thoughts on where we are now versus where we were then.
Oh, I'll tell you, I think he would be disgusted where we are right now in this country. The diet, the visceral way people treat each other right now is just, it hurts sometimes.
It does. I agree.
Final thoughts, Jenny. What key points would you like the listeners to take from the interview?
This job is tough. It's fun, but it can be very tough. And I always suggest lean into your counterparts and learn from each other. There's many of us, we've been doing this a long time, myself included, and I'm thrilled to share my thoughts so that I can help somebody else succeed in this role.
Awesome. Anything else you'd like to add?
PIOs, you're not alone and you're not expected to do it alone. So kind of goes back to my key thoughts as well, but reach out and build those relationships with others.
Got to network with people around you. It is so important.
Absolutely.
I reach out to people all the time for advice, all the time. How can people best reach out to you if they want to connect or learn more or take one of your trainings?
So my website is Hartwood Creative, HARTWOOD, creative.com. And I'm on Instagram most often, and that's at Hartwood Creative. And email is Jenny, JENNY, at hartwoodcreative.com.
And I will add all those into the show notes.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Jenny, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been truly a pleasure.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for having me.
And that was Jenny Weeks from Hartwood Creative. That's all for this week. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get notified of the latest episode. If you are listening on a platform that allows reviews, please give us a review. We appreciate any review, good or bad. It helps us improve on each episode. Until next time, be safe.